For 10 years, Michelle Jones lived in the shadows of a powerful mafia empire, hiding her brilliance behind invisibility while preparing her revenge. Everything changes. The night the new Don, Tom Vesperi, sees through her disguise and pulls her into the heart of his world. What begins as a dangerous game of power and control turns into a forbidden bond where vengeance and desire collide. Now Michelle must choose: destroy the man who holds her secrets, or lose everything for the only man who truly sees her. In this game, love is not salvation. It is the highest price. If this story pulled you in, subscribe and turn on notifications. The war has only just begun. And tell us in the comments, did Michelle make the right choice? Your voice shapes the next chapter. The fluorescent light of the 7th floor felt sickly on Michelle Jones's skin. For 10 years, the drab, oversized blazer had been her suit of armor, the thick-rimmed glasses a self-imposed prison. She was the ghost in the machine at Vesperi Global, the financial arm of the organization, a corporate phantom whose only job was to count and catalog the shadows of illicit wealth. She existed to be unseen. And then the silence broke. The sudden hush in the main bullpen was not the absence of sound, but the presence of menace. It was a sound that had been building for 3 days, since the news of the former Don's sudden retirement and the rumors of the swift, cold consolidation of power. Michelle's stomach tightened, a slow, deep coil of dread that had nothing to do with fear of losing her job and everything to do with the mission she had so carefully guarded. "Be the furniture," she repeated in her mind, a silent, desperate mantra. "Watch the numbers, don't watch the man." She didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. The air itself shifted, becoming heavier, laced with the scent of something impossibly expensive. Sandalwood and Italian leather, a scent of old money and new violence. It was the scent of Tom Vesperi. Tom Vesperi. The name was a whip in the quiet room. He was the one who hadn't asked for power, but had simply taken it. A calculated act that had left whispers of blood and ruthlessness across the city's financial district. Michelle gripped the edges of her keyboard, her nails pressing crescent moons into her palms. Show, don't tell. She wasn't nervous. Her hands simply refused to relax. He stood in the doorway of the inner office, framed against the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a dark silhouette against the sun's blinding gold. He was younger than the rumors suggested, his frame lean and sharp, not the heavy-set brutes she was used to dealing with. His suit was bespoke, a piece of art that didn't merely clothe him, but seemed to contain the raw energy vibrating beneath it. He didn't address the room. He didn't have to. The silence did the talking for him. Michelle kept her gaze fixed on the monitor, detailing a complex transfer involving shell corporations in the Caymans. She felt the sudden, involuntary heat rise in her neck, a betrayal. She was not supposed to react. She was beige, boring, and brilliant, the perfect combination of invisibility. Then, the cold, smooth voice cut through the professional din, sharp as cut crystal. It was an Italian accent refined by Ivy League education, a sound of absolute authority. "Close the doors," Vesperi commanded. "Everyone, return to your work." He stepped fully into the room, and the employees, used to the bluster of the previous capo, snapped into a rigid, terrified efficiency. But his gaze did not stay on the nervous VPs or the sweating managers. It swept the room, dismissive, until it landed, and stopped, on the corner where Michelle sat, half hidden by a tower of archaic filing cabinets. Michelle felt the connection like a physical strike. It wasn't the attention she had feared. It was the quality of it. His eyes, the color of wet slate, weren't registering her clothes or her deliberately slumped posture. They were registering her. He didn't see the facade. He saw the flaw in the camouflage. "He knows," her panicked internal voice screamed, though she knew that was paranoia. Vesperi finally moved, his Italian leather shoes making a soft, deliberate tap on the polished marble floor. He didn't walk. He stalked, his movements economical and predatory. He approached her desk, and the scent of sandalwood and danger intensified. "You are Jones," he stated, his voice low, a near whisper that somehow resonated more loudly than a shout. Michelle's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding to be heard. She forced her voice into a dull, monotonous register, her fingers staying perfectly still on the keyboard. "Michelle Jones, sir. Senior Analyst, Subledger Division," she recited, without looking up. She had perfected the art of the bureaucratic drone. Senior Analyst, who has never asked for a promotion, never taken a vacation, and never made a mistake. His tone was flat, assessing, devoid of compliment. "Your last performance review noted you are excessively thorough to a fault." She finally risked a glance. His lips had the mere shadow of a smile, a movement that didn't touch his eyes. They were focused, calculating, piercing through the thick lenses of her glasses to the mind behind them. He didn't see a woman. He saw a weapon. It was madness. It was wrong. And yet, it was undeniably real. The conflict flared immediately. Her calculated invisibility was suddenly her greatest liability. Her deep-seated hatred for the world he represented was momentarily eclipsed by the dizzying tension of being seen by the man who held her fate, and her vengeance, in his hands. "Thoroughness is a requirement for this department, sir," she replied, her voice steady. The composure was a small, necessary lie she told herself to maintain control. He leaned slightly over her desk, a movement that brought his proximity into the danger zone. His presence was overwhelming, a contained storm of masculine power. Michelle inhaled sharply, not from desire, but from the instinctive awareness of an apex predator. She could almost taste the fear, though it was hers, bitter and metallic, mixed with the expensive cologne. "That is about to change, Ms. Jones," Vesperi said, his eyes darkening infinitesimally. "My restructuring requires a certain kind of loyalty and a certain kind of ruthlessness. You clearly possess the latter." He pushed a thick, cream-colored dossier across her desk. The paper was cold beneath her fingers. "Effective immediately. You are the chief financial analyst. You report directly and solely to me. You will move your things to the inner office. Now." The abruptness of the order was a calculated blow. It was a promotion that yanked her from the safety of the shadows and placed her directly in the line of fire. It was the end of her 10 years of deliberate anonymity. It was the destruction of her mission. With all respect, sir, I am comfortable where I am. I am best suited to the data in the subledger," she stammered, a rare display of weakness. She couldn't allow this. Proximity meant exposure. Exposure meant failure. Vesperi straightened, his back rigid. He didn't argue. He simply waited, letting the suffocating weight of his authority crush her dissent. The silence that followed was worse than any threat. It was the silence of inevitability. "The choice, Ms. Jones," he finally said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper, "is not whether you work for me, but how you work for me. The subledger is for those who hide. My office is for those who hunt." He paused, a deliberate cinematic beat. This was the moment of high-impact action, perfect for a sudden vocal pause in the narration. "And you, Michelle Jones," he concluded, his gaze sweeping her once, from the shapeless neck of her blouse to her worn shoes, "are not meant to hide." He turned and walked away, back toward the main office without a backward glance. The moment his presence receded, Michelle finally exhaled, a ragged, silent thing that escaped through her tightly clenched teeth. The new dossier felt like a bomb on her desk. "He saw me." She lifted the dossier. Beneath the name Jones, Vesperi had scribbled one word, an annotation that filled her with pure, incandescent terror, and a strange, unwelcome surge of anticipation. Unmasked. This was no longer a game of finance. It was a game of intimacy, power, and survival. The hunter had become the hunted, and the first rule of her mission had just been irrevocably broken. The transfer took less than an hour. It was efficient, silent, and humiliating. Michelle watched from her old desk as two men in dark suits systematically dismantled her decade of invisibility. They didn't just move her monitor and files, they were dismantling her carefully constructed persona. The tower of filing cabinets, her visual shield, was carted away. Her desk, her haven, was scrubbed clean. She walked across the hall to the new office, and the scent of the Vespery world hit her again. Cleaner air, the faint metallic smell of new technology, and the lingering dominant trace of Tom Vespery's cologne. This was a cage lined with silk. The new office was sleek, all glass and charcoal wood, positioned directly adjacent to Tom's private sanctuary. The connection was implicit. She was now within his sphere of control, a satellite orbiting a dark, powerful sun. The door to his office was open, and he sat at his vast, uncluttered mahogany desk, his back to her, looking out over the city. A deliberate display of indifference, or control. Michelle placed her single box of personal items, a framed diploma, a spare pair of thick socks, nothing truly personal, on the corner of her new desk. Control the narrative. Maintain the distance, her mind commanded. She booted up the system and pulled up the high-level operational ledgers, burying herself in the numbers that were her only truth. The silence here was different. It was an active participant in the scene, the heavy silence of anticipation, like a pulled bowstring. A chime broke the quiet. Tom's voice came over the intercom, flat and professional. "In my office, Ms. Jones. 5 minutes, bring the Cayman file." The Cayman file. The very one detailing the transfer that she was using as the focus of her vengeance. Michelle felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest. Not fear, but pure, crystalline resolve. She picked up the slim folder and walked the short, perilous distance to his door. Tom didn't turn as she entered. He simply gestured to a high-backed leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit." Michelle sat, crossing her legs neatly, her oversized blazer feeling like a ridiculous, sweaty costume. Her position gave her a clear view of his profile. The sharp, unyielding line of his jaw, the slight curl of dark hair at the nape of his neck. The previous administration favored volume over security. He began, his voice low, a rhythmic rumble that she was already having trouble compartmentalizing. "I favor discretion. Explain the Cayman transfer, but more importantly, tell me what you don't see." Michelle took a breath. This was the opening she needed. She focused on the financial facts, her voice regaining its drone. "The transfer is a classic layering mechanism. They're obscuring the source of the funds. What I don't see, sir, is the final recipient. The paper trail ends with a blind trust managed by a Luxembourg holding company, which is a dead end," Tom finished, finally turning. His slate eyes locked onto hers, and the intensity was a physical force, pinning her to the chair. "A dead end that a senior analyst would accept. But you are not just a senior analyst, Michelle. You are a hunter. Tell me the risk, not the accounting." The use of her first name, the subtle challenge, the implied awareness of her true intellect. It was a sophisticated tactic. He was playing with her, testing the limits of her disguise. She felt the sudden, hot flush of being exposed behind the glasses. "The risk," she responded, meeting his gaze for a fraction of a second, "is that this transfer is a decoy. A large, visible maneuver to distract from a smaller, more important one. The real money is moving through a channel we haven't identified because we're looking at the volume, not the velocity." A genuine, albeit small smile finally touched his lips, reaching his eyes this time. It wasn't a warm expression. It was the satisfaction of a manipulator who had found his tool. "Precisely," he murmured. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. The gesture subtly closed the distance between them, creating an instantaneous, non-sexual intimacy. "Now, we address the aesthetic problem." Michelle stiffened. "Sir, I fail to see how my personal attire is relevant to the velocity of the funds. It's relevant to my image, and therefore yours." His voice was soft, reasonable, yet utterly final. "You are my chief analyst. You will be at my side in meetings with people who judge a person's worth by the quality of their cufflink. You look like you are trying to disappear, Michelle, and I need you to be visible." He stood, a sudden fluid movement, and walked around the desk. Michelle watched his approach, her internal monologue a flurry of tactical panic. She fought the urge to rise, to create space. He stopped not behind her, but beside her, placing a hand on the back of her chair. The simple act sent a faint, low-level tremor through the leather, which translated directly into a nervous flutter in her own chest. She could smell the warm wool of his suit and his clean, musky skin. This proximity was a threat, a silent declaration of dominance. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently remove the thick-rimmed glasses from her nose. The world immediately sharpened and brightened. The golden light streaming through the window, which she had previously filtered, now hit her directly, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. But more importantly, her eyes she had deliberately muted for years, were now completely uncovered. Their gazes connected, unmediated, intense. His breath was warm on her temple as he leaned down just slightly. "I am not interested in your past, only your future," he whispered. "But your future requires a different uniform. If you want to play a game of power, you must look the part of power." He placed the glasses on the desk. The gesture was both intimate and controlling, a forced unmasking that was part of the game. Go home, get a haircut, buy clothes that fit the intelligence you possess. You are no longer the furniture, Michelle. You are the queen on the board, and I have just moved you into striking position. He stepped back, returning to his powerful stance behind the desk. The momentary proximity was gone, but the shock of the unmasking remained. Michelle felt the air cold on her bare skin where the glasses had been. She hated him for seeing her, for making her feel the raw vulnerability of her own face. She stood slowly, her hands gripping the Cayman file. "Understood, sir. One more thing." Tom's voice stopped her at the door. "Wear colors. Wear something that makes you impossible to ignore. Because from now on, Michelle, everyone will be watching you." He offered her a predatory, challenging smile. "Including me." Michelle nodded, her jaw tight. She didn't look back. Walking out, she could hear the distinct dry sound of the door closing behind her. A definitive sound, a pronouncement of the end of her old life. In the elevator, she finally touched her face, tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. She saw her reflection in the polished steel doors. Without the armor, her face was sharper, the look in her eyes more defiant. He thinks this is about aesthetics. He thinks the clothes are his control. She ran a thumb over the rim of her glasses on the file. The clothes are a tool, and tools can be used for vengeance. The weakness of the surprise was already hardening into the steel of resolve. The true game had begun, and now she would play it on his terms, right beside him. Michelle did not shop for clothes. She acquired a uniform. Her revenge was a mission, and a mission required the right gear. She spent a precise hour in a single, high-end boutique, selecting items not for allure, but for structural authority. She chose the color Tom Vespery had requested, a deep imperial blue, a color of loyalty and cold, undeniable power. The dress was a sheath of heavy silk, severe in its lines, accentuating her height without revealing anything explicit. It was an aesthetic weapon, meant to draw the eye, but to keep the man behind it at a distance. She shed the old life in the dressing room, the shapeless wool, the thick cotton. She looked at her reflection, a momentary stranger staring back. The woman was sharper, more dangerous, the intelligence in her eyes now utterly exposed. It was a face built for war. He wanted a queen. I will give him one made of ice and sharp edges. The next morning, her arrival was an event. Stepping off the elevator, Michelle felt the shift immediately. The new outfit was heavy, a luxurious weight that made her stand straighter. Her heels, thin stilettos that tapped a confident metronomic beat on the marble, announced her presence. Every head in the bullpen snapped toward her. The silence this time was not fear, but assessment. She ignored them all, walking straight toward her new office. As she passed Tom Vespery's open door, he did not look up from the tablet resting in his hands. He was waiting. Michelle sat at her desk and waited too, breathing slowly, controlling the slight, nervous tremor in her diaphragm. She knew he had registered every detail of her appearance without needing to look. It was the next move in his game of control. After 10 tense minutes, the intercom buzzed. "My office, Michelle. And wear the jacket." He emerged moments later, and this time, he was not in his office. He was standing in hers. He was closer than she expected, and her heart gave a single hard thump against her ribs. "The color is acceptable," he murmured, his eyes sweeping her. A thorough, clinical inspection that nonetheless felt overwhelmingly personal. His gaze lingered on her exposed neck, a point of subtle vulnerability. "It is the color of authority, Mr. Vespery," she stated, retrieving the tailored blazer that matched the blue dress. "Authority is earned, not worn," he countered, his lips curving into that familiar, unsettling half-smile. "Tonight, you earn it. We have a dinner in Little Italy, a discreet meeting with Donato. You will sit beside me. You will speak only when spoken to. You will listen and analyze." He stepped closer, reaching out to gently adjust the collar of her jacket. The move was fast, unanticipated. His fingers, warm and firm, brushed the skin at the base of her neck before quickly retreating. The contact was minimal, yet the flash of heat left a trail behind it, a completely non-sexual, yet intensely charged moment of physical proximity and dominance. "You are my shield, Michelle. Donato only sees women. He will not see the numbers I need him to miss," Vespery said, his voice dropping to a low, seductive rumble that felt like a threat and a compliment simultaneously. "Do not betray your post. I am a financial analyst, Mr. Vespery, not a shield," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her. "In this world," he retorted, leaning in until the expensive scent of his cologne, sandalwood and rain, filled her senses. "The two are synonymous. Now let's go. Our driver is waiting." The location was the Palazzo Vesperi, a nondescript stone building that housed Tom Vespery's true operational center. The meeting was in a private, soundproofed dining room on the top floor. As Michelle was led in, the atmosphere was immediately heavy, a palpable weight of old power and money. The room smelled of aged leather, expensive cigars, and a faint, complex aroma of a rich, slow-cooked dinner. Donato, a man whose face was a roadmap of former battles, rose as they entered. His eyes, however, bypassed Tom and settled entirely on Michelle. It was the exact attention she had sought to avoid for a decade. The attention of a brute who saw only the outward appearance. "Tom, you did not tell me you were bringing an artifact this beautiful to the table," Donato rumbled, his voice thick with a vulgarity that made Michelle's stomach churn. Tom Vespery's hand rested on the small of Michelle's back, a possessive, non-sexual gesture meant purely to signal ownership and control. The heat of his palm through the silk was an anchor she both resented and desperately needed. "Michelle is my chief analyst, Donato. She is the reason our portfolio is stronger than yours. She is not a trinket." Tom's voice was flat, dangerously cold. He spoke the word stronger with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis. Michelle felt a surge of unwelcome satisfaction. Her hate for the environment was immense, but the validation of her mind by the man she was tasked to destroy was an unexpected fuel. The dinner began. 3 hours of negotiation masked by small talk. Michelle ate little, her mind tracking the dialogue, charting the lies and the subtle shifts in power. Tom Vespery was mesmerizing to watch. He was a master of the pause, using the silence as a weapon, letting his enemies talk themselves into corners. Michelle found herself caught in his gravitational pull. Every time she looked up to catch a detail, his slate eyes were already on her. It was a constant, intense exchange of gazes, a communication only they shared. "He's challenging me to keep up. He wants me to understand the game." During a tense moment about a land deal, Donato made a dismissive comment about Tom's lack of traditional muscle. Tom's jaw tightened, and he slowly reached for his wine glass. Michelle, reading his escalating tension, slid a small napkin discreetly under his glass as he set it down. A small, unnecessary gesture that betrayed her deep-seated understanding of his need for precision and order. Their fingers brushed, the momentary touch of cool glass and warm skin. Tom's eyes snapped to hers. In that fraction of a second, an intense, silent message passed between them. We are a unit. I see your control. I will protect your image. Tom Vesperi paused, that microsecond of connection, allowing his anger to recede. He simply gave Donato a slow, lethal smile. Muscle is a weakness, Donato. Predictable. I prefer the invisible kind. He gestured toward Michelle with a slight nod. Like a transaction that you don't realize bled you dry until the morning after. Donato laughed, a throaty, unpleasant sound, but his eyes narrowed on Michelle. He realized she was not just an adornment. She was the architect of the numbers he was struggling to comprehend. The conversation dragged into the late hours. Michelle, mentally exhausted but energized by the raw danger, excused herself to the restroom. This was her moment of release, a chance to breathe away the suffocating tension. As she stood at the wash basin, a younger man, Donato's nephew Salvatore, one of the men she had specifically marked for his recklessness, entered the room. He didn't acknowledge her. He stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror, his eyes slow and possessive. I have been watching you all night, Contessa, Salvatore whispered, his voice slurred with liquor and malice. You were supposed to be the boring accountant. You are a distraction. And in our world, distractions are cut out. He took a slow, menacing step toward the door, blocking her exit. The air thickened again, this time with a very real, non-psychological peril. Michelle's heart began its rapid, urgent beat. You have no idea who I am, Michelle stated, her voice icy, devoid of fear. Her mind instantly went to her mission, to the hidden laptop in her apartment. Exposure here could mean the end of everything. Oh, I think I do, Salvatore sneered, raising a finger and pointing past her toward her reflection. I know that a woman who dresses like that and talks to Tom like that is not just counting pennies. He leaned in, his breath hot and stale. This was not flirtation. It was a threat. Tell me, Contessa, he hissed, his gaze dropping to the floor. Does your little hidden laptop contain the details of your transfer to the FBI? The blood drained from Michelle's face. Foreshadowing delivered. The fear was now absolute, immediate. She didn't move, fighting to control the sudden, violent tremor in her hands. But before she could formulate a response, the door was slammed open. Tom Vesperi stood there, a vision of contained fury, his eyes black and lethal. She doesn't talk to you, Salvatore. Vesperi's voice was low, terrifyingly calm. She talks to me. He walked into the small room, his presence instantly shrinking the space, placing himself deliberately between Salvatore and Michelle. The analysis is finished, Vesperi stated, not looking at Michelle, but his words were a clear, precise order for her benefit. Wait for me outside. Michelle, grabbing the lifeline, walked out, her legs surprisingly steady. She left the two men in the small, soundproofed room. As the door swung shut, the last thing she heard was the subtle, low sound of a fist connecting with flesh, followed by a muffled gasp. She waited by the elevator, her back pressed against the cold marble wall. Tom Vesperi's protection was a double-edged knife. It saved her in the moment, but confirmed to him, and now to his enemies, that she was irrevocably his. Her mission was now compromised by the very man she needed to get close to. The elevator opened. She was breathless, not from fear, but from the raw, high-stakes drama of it all. When Tom emerged moments later, his composure was flawless, his suit immaculate. Only the faint, coppery scent of blood on his knuckles, quickly wiped, betrayed the violence that had just occurred. He looked at her, his eyes intense, and gave her a single silent nod of acknowledgement. "The game is escalating, Michelle," he murmured, his voice a low, intimate warning. "You should have stayed hidden." But he didn't regret the move. He wanted her visible. And that terrifying certainty was the final, devastating kiss of the night. The ride back from the palazzo was conducted in a silence heavier than any conversation. Michelle sat in the armored Mercedes, the rich leather cool beneath the silk of her dress. Tom Vesperi was beside her, a contained storm, staring out at the fleeting city lights. The air was thick with the coppery scent of old blood and the residual adrenaline of the evening's confrontation. Michelle had always believed that the only person you could rely on in this world was yourself. Yet, only minutes ago, Tom Vesperi, the man she intended to dismantle, had physically intervened to protect her. The paradox was a sharp, bitter taste on her tongue. He protected his asset. Nothing more. Her internal voice insisted, frantically trying to reassert the narrative of pure hatred. He cannot afford to lose the architect of his fortune. She risked a glance at him. The sharp, severe lines of his profile were softened only by the faint, warm glow of the dashboard light. His hand rested on his knee, the knuckles slightly red, a testament to the efficient violence she had just witnessed. He was a creature of immense power, and she was dangerously close to his gravitational center. "Salvatore is a liability," Tom finally said, his voice flat, emotionless. "He broke the first rule. Never assume. He assumed your worth was your appearance. And you, Mr. Vesperi?" Michelle asked, her voice deliberately challenging, low enough to be intimate, yet sharp enough to maintain distance. "What did you assume?" He turned his head slowly, and his slate eyes fixed on her. The intensity of his gaze was the only thing that could pierce the darkness of the car. "I assumed you were a weapon misplaced," he murmured. "I assumed the intelligence in your eyes was wasted on data entry. And I assumed you wore those hideous clothes to hide something more important than beauty." Michelle felt the familiar, hot rush of a blush, a purely involuntary reaction to being so precisely seen. She hated that he understood the game she was playing before she had even made her first strategic move. The man was not just a Don, he was a master manipulator. "You assumed correctly," she admitted, giving him a small, controlled nod. "But that does not grant you the right to physical control or the right to interfere with my interactions. It grants me the right to protect my investment," he countered, the logic cold and unassailable. "And you now have a debt of protection. In my world, those debts are paid in loyalty, not cash." This was the escalation. He was using the event to tighten the chain around her. "My loyalty is to the Vesperi organization's financial stability," she stated firmly. He smiled, a dark, slow curve of his lips that was mesmerizing and frightening. "The Vesperi organization is me, Michelle. The stability is the loyalty. The distinction is a luxury you can no longer afford." The car pulled up to her Upper East Side building, a discreet, expensive fortress that she could only afford because of the detailed financial plan for her post-vengeance life. "Get some sleep," Vesperi commanded. "Tomorrow, you will prepare for the Milan delegation, and you will wear the color of fire. I want them to see what I have acquired." Michelle opened the car door, but before she stepped out, she stopped. She looked back at him, forcing herself to maintain eye contact, to match his intensity. "Mr. Vesperi," she began, her voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I do not know what Salvatore said, but if you have any questions about my transfers or my loyalty, I suggest you ask them now. I despise the half-truths of this world." A long beat of silence stretched between them, charged with a dizzying mix of suspicion, challenge, and palpable chemistry. Tom Vesperi reached out, his hand moving with a predator's speed, not toward her, but toward the seatbelt strap against her chest. He unclipped it with a soft, metallic click, a sound that echoed in the quiet car. The movement brought his arm just inches from her breast, the proximity a calculated, non-sexual threat that made her hold her breath. He leaned in, his clean, musky scent surrounding her. "I know everything I need to know, Michelle. You are a genius with a death wish. You hate me. That is your greatest strength, Because it makes you unpredictable. I will not break your hatred. I will use it." He paused, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips, and then snapping back to her eyes. "And if your transfers were to the FBI, you wouldn't be in this car. You'd be in a river. Good night." The dismissal was final. Michelle stepped out onto the sidewalk, the night air cool against the sudden heat of her skin. She didn't look back until the sound of the engine had faded into the background hum of the city. The next day, Michelle found a small, heavy black box waiting on her new desk. There was no card, no note, just the scent of sandalwood and a cold piece of paper attached to the lid with Tom Vesperi's precise, angular script. Vesperi Global Access, Tier Y. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a silver flash drive, a secure key to the Vesperi network, granting her administrative access to files she previously couldn't even dream of touching. It was an act of staggering trust, a move that exposed his empire to her, a gesture that both terrified and thrilled her mission-driven heart. He gave me the keys to his fortress. He is testing me, or baiting me. She stared at the key. This access was the final piece of the puzzle, the data she needed to complete her vengeance, but it also meant she was now entirely implicated in his crimes. She booted up the secure terminal and inserted the flash drive. The screen flashed green. The afternoon was a blur of high-stakes, ruthless analysis. Michelle felt a strange, intoxicating freedom now that her mask was discarded. She was the best, and she worked like it, dissecting financial structures, identifying vulnerabilities in the opposing families, and creating firewalls to protect Vesperi's most crucial assets. At 4 p.m., Tom Vesperi appeared in her doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her work. He held a glass of dark amber liquid. "Impressive," he stated, raising the glass in a silent toast. "You have corrected a dozen deficiencies in 4 hours." "I work better when I'm not attempting to disappear," she replied, not looking up, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of her full attention. He walked to her side, his presence a heavy, commanding weight. He placed his hand on the corner of her desk, his thumb almost touching her mousepad. The movement was slow, deliberate, a silent claim on her workspace. "The Milan delegation arrives tomorrow," he said, the low tone of his voice vibrating close to her ear. "They are old world, Michelle. They don't respect American structure. They respect commitment." He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, the smell of whiskey and clean linen enveloping her. The sheer proximity made her breath hitch. This was the dangerous edge of his control. Constant, non-sexual pressure. "Commitment is shown in 2 ways, blood and possession," he continued, his voice barely audible. "Tonight, you will acquire something that visually seals your role, something that makes a statement about your loyalty to the structure." He placed a velvet box, identical to the one with the flash drive, beside her keyboard. "Open it." Michelle slowly opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was not jewelry, but a magnificent heavy gold fountain pen, an antique with a slight wear to the cap. The weight of it in her hand was instantly familiar and solid. "This belonged to my grandfather," Vesperi explained. "He signed the formation documents of the Vesperi Bank with it. Now, it signs yours. Tomorrow, you will use it to sign the new charter I've drawn up for the delegation. It is a symbol that you are irrevocably part of the financial spine of this organization." Michelle felt a chill. This was not a gift. It was a shackle. A piece of history. An heirloom of crime, tying her hands to his fate. "I don't sign documents, Mr. Vesperi. I analyze them," she said, placing the pen back in the box. He smiled, a true, complete smile this time. A blinding flash of white that made her heart skip a beat. A smile of pure, malevolent charm. "You will sign this one, Michelle, because commitment must be seen. And tomorrow, the Milan delegation will see that you are the woman who signs my documents. You are the woman who carries the weight of my trust." He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes holding hers in a deep, electric gaze that communicated the heart of the conflict. "Your mission is vengeance. My move is trust. Choose now." or be consumed. The pen was the perfect, terrible symbol. By signing, she would betray her own morality and solidify her place as the queen on the board. By refusing, she would destroy the access she needed for her revenge. The emotional cliffhanger was set. Michelle chose a dress the color of the final desperate flash of a setting sun. A deep, burning crimson. The color was a silent scream, a deliberate act of defiance. If she was to be seen, she would be seen as a threat, not a possession. She fastened the heirloom pen, a heavy, cold weight, into her jacket pocket, a symbol of the chain Vesperi had deliberately placed upon her. Walking into the Vesperi penthouse that evening, she wasn't just wearing red, she was wearing resolve. The room, a cavern of minimalist modernism, was filled with the low murmur of Italian and the hushed gravity of old-world power. Tom Vesperi stood near the vast windows, a study in dark elegance. When his eyes found her, the intensity was immediate and overwhelming. They didn't just register her presence, they registered the declaration of the color she wore. A slow, possessive smile touched his lips. It was a smile of a man whose expectations had been not only met, but exceeded. He immediately came to her side, his presence a sudden, stabilizing force against the currents of the room. He took her elbow, a formal, non-sexual gesture of presentation, and guided her toward the Milan delegation. "This is Michelle Jones," Tom announced, his voice smooth and authoritative, introducing her not as an assistant, but as an equal. "She is the only person who touches the central books. The integrity of our financial structure is, henceforth, tied to her analysis." The leader of the Milan delegation, a stout, silver-haired man named Signore Bianchi, offered a curt, dismissive nod. His eyes held the same appraisal as Salvatore's, a look of chauvinistic contempt for the woman he saw as an American novelty. "A beautiful detail, Tom," Bianchi drawled in Italian. "But a woman's touch is too soft for the blood and steel of the ledger." Michelle felt the familiar, cold surge of anger, the very emotion she needed for her vengeance. Tom tightened his grip on her elbow, an implicit warning to maintain her composure. But the warning was unnecessary. "Signore?" Michelle intercepted smoothly, her Italian precise and fluent. "My touch is not soft. It is surgical. Soft touches leave scars. I prefer clean excisions. I believe your recent tax audit in Rome was an unnecessary scar, no?" The question was a calculated strike, an implication that she knew intimate details of Bianchi's vulnerabilities. Bianchi's smile faltered, replaced by a momentary, sharp look of shock. Tom Vesperi's gaze shifted to Michelle, filled with a raw, electric thrill of pride and danger. He hadn't asked her to speak, yet she had defended his structure, using her intelligence as the true weapon he intended her to be. The next 2 hours were a performance, a relentless dance of power and analysis. Michelle presented the charter, laying out the new structure with a cold, clear logic that dismantled their arguments one by one. She was magnificent, the ultimate antagonist to his enemies, her voice clear, her reasoning impeccable. When the time came to sign, Tom placed the parchment on the table. "Signore Bianchi will sign first. Then you, Michelle," Vesperi instructed, handing her the velvet box with his grandfather's pen. Michelle took the pen, the cold, heavy gold a stark contrast to the heat radiating from her skin. She looked down at the document, a legal framework that officially sealed her allegiance to his criminal enterprise. "Vengeance requires sacrifice," she reminded herself. "The deeper I am in, the more complete the access. The closer I am to the heart." She took a deep breath, the air in the room thick with the smell of expensive cigar smoke and victory. Her hand was perfectly steady. She signed the document with a flourish, the smooth, mechanical sound of the antique nib scratching the heavy paper echoing in the sudden quiet of the room. When she looked up, Tom Vesperi was watching her. The look in his eyes was no longer that of a master observing an asset. It was a look of unadulterated, possessive chemistry. He saw the ruthless fire she had just displayed, the brilliance of her mind, and the courage it took to sign her name to a lie. "Brillant," Bianchi muttered grudgingly. Tom ignored Bianchi. He reached out and gently took the pen from Michelle's hand, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch of electric awareness. He placed the pen back in its box, his eyes never leaving hers. "The night is concluded," Vesperi announced, his voice carrying the finality of a decree. "I will see you all out." He led the delegation to the elevators, leaving Michelle alone in the large room. She stood, catching her breath, feeling the sudden, dizzying drop from the adrenaline high. She had won the battle but lost a piece of her soul to his game. When Tom returned, the look on his face had changed. The mask of the calculating Don had slipped, replaced by an expression of raw, uncontained male desire, a pure, intense focus. He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. The tap of his shoes on the marble floor was the only sound. Michelle's body, exhausted by the tension of the evening, screamed for retreat, but her feet were cemented to the floor. This is it, she thought, her internal panic rising. This is the price. He stopped directly in front of her. His hands went up, not to touch her body, but to cup her face, his thumbs resting gently on her sharp cheekbones. His skin was warm, his touch firm but strangely respectful. He looked into her eyes, a deep, silent communication that bypassed language entirely. "You are fire, Michelle," he whispered, his voice low and gravelly. "You burn with a purpose." He leaned in slowly. This was not the expected kiss of passion or demand. This was a kiss of confirmation. His lips, cool and firm, brushed hers, a fleeting, intense sutura of two wills. It was a test, a claim, and a momentary, breathless surrender to the intense emotional chemistry that had been building since she signed the charter. The kiss was too brief to be sexual, too charged to be innocent. It was a subtle kiss, a simple contact of lips that communicated the impossible. "You are mine in this war, and I am yours." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers for a moment of shared comprehension. Michelle felt a total loss of control. The taste of whiskey and mint on his breath lingered on her lips, a delicious, dangerous aftertaste. She hated him for the weakness she felt, the momentary lapse in her decade-long defense. "That was for the performance," Tom murmured, his voice now regaining its professional tone, the mask snapping back into place. "And for the risk you took tonight." The risk was calculated, she managed, her voice a thin, shaky whisper. "Everything is a calculation," Vesperi countered, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Even this. Now go home, Michelle, and prepare the summary. Tomorrow, the war begins." He released her face. Michelle walked toward the elevator, her knees feeling strangely weak. She didn't look back, but she could feel the heat of his gaze on her spine, a relentless, possessive pressure. In the elevator, she raised a trembling hand to her lips. It was a kiss of power, a kiss of possession. But in the pit of her stomach, beneath the cold hatred of her vengeance, a single, terrifying thought bloomed. What if the calculation of the heart is the only one I cannot win? Foreshadowing. The kiss has changed the nature of their contract. The emotional lines are now blurred. The kiss, that calculated electric press of lips, had shattered the clean lines of Michelle's mission. The professional barrier was gone, replaced by a tense, raw awareness that vibrated between her and Tom Vesperi. She repeated his words like a mantra. That was for the performance, a calculation. But her body remembered the brief warmth, the dangerous taste of control. The days following the Milan meeting were an intensification of the proximity trap. Tom Vesperi kept Michelle glued to his side. She was no longer just the analyst. She was the silent partner in every strategy session, the shadow in every armored car ride. Her new uniform, the sharp dresses, the imposing confidence, had become her second skin. But beneath the silk, her old self was fighting a losing battle against the new, unsettling attraction. One afternoon, Tom summoned her to his office, not for a meeting, but for a private working lunch. The door was closed. He sat on the edge of his massive desk, an open folder of financial projections resting on his lap. Michelle sat on the low sofa opposite him, a small, polished wooden board separating them. He talked about market manipulation, about the delicate art of controlled collapse. Michel responded with cold, incisive logic, detailing the systemic weaknesses he could exploit. The conversation was purely professional, yet the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Michel noticed a tiny, almost invisible scratch on his jawline, a thin red line that suggested a careless shave or, more likely, a late-night low-level confrontation. "The Eastern market is a shell game," she explained, leaning forward to point to a specific number on the printout. "We need to hit the secondary structure, the one they think is protected." Tom Vesperi reached out, his hand covering hers on the paper. The contact was brief, a professional gesture of pointing out a detail, but the heat of his palm instantly short-circuited Michelle's focus. She felt the involuntary tightening in her stomach, a purely physical reaction to the forbidden proximity. "Not just hit it, Michelle," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers, the financial discussion momentarily forgotten. "We need to implode it. Make them beg for the safety we can offer." His gaze was intense, a deep, silent dive into her consciousness. She felt in that moment that he wasn't talking about the market. He was talking about her decade of hiding, her wall of hatred. He wanted to implode her control. She pulled her hand away, regaining her composure with a sharp intake of breath. Implosion carries a higher risk of collateral damage. "Risk is necessary for reward," he stated, his lips curving into that knowing, possessive smile. He understood the subtext. He always did. It's wrong. It's his power. It's the thrill of the danger, her internal voice argued, trying to rationalize the sudden, unwelcome surge of desire. It's a Stockholm syndrome of the balance sheet. He stood up, walking to the wet bar. "Whiskey?" "Water, please," she replied. He brought the glass of water back to the sofa. Instead of handing it to her, he placed it on the small table between them. He then sat down again. Closer this time, the distance between his knee and hers now only a few inches. He was intentionally reducing the safe zone. "I need you to run a full analysis on the Falcone family's real estate portfolio," Tom commanded, his voice back to the low, authoritative tone. "Everything they own, including the personal residences." Michelle stared at the name. The Falcone family. The very name that had cost her everything 10 years ago. The very reason for her revenge. This was the final devastating gift of his trust. The direct path to her targets. The pen, the access key, and now, the name. "The personal residences are not part of the commercial portfolio," she noted, her voice carefully flat. "They are collateral damage," Vesperi simply said, his slate eyes cold and clear. "Find the flaw in their foundation, Michelle. Show me where they bleed." He didn't need to ask why she hated them. He already knew. He was giving her the power of his organization to exact her personal vendetta, not out of kindness, but to bind her loyalty to him irrevocably. A sudden, sharp ring of the main office phone broke the dangerous intimacy of the moment. Tom Vesperi stood up, irritated. He walked to his desk and answered. Michelle watched him, focusing on the details, the tension in his shoulder, the slight clench of his jaw as he listened. His expression turned instantly to icy granite. He hung up without a word. "My security chief has been compromised," he stated, his voice low, a controlled tremor of suppressed violence. "The system was breached. They were looking for something." "What were they looking for?" Michelle asked, her professional curiosity instantly overcoming her personal fear. Tom Vesperi's gaze snapped to her. It wasn't a question he was asking. It was a silent, intense accusation. He walked back to the sofa, his movements swift and predatory. "They were looking for the documentation of my grandfather's bank charter," he hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. The smell of his whiskey was strong now, a dangerous mix of sophistication and raw emotion. The charter she had signed. The one that, by association, contained her name. And they also asked about a specific analyst who suddenly changed her wardrobe. Vesperi continued. his voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with pure, unadulterated warning. They know about you, Michelle. They know you are my weakness. He reached out, his hand moving quickly to the lapel of her crimson jacket. He didn't pull her closer, but he felt the silk of the garment between his fingers. You are no longer a phantom. You are a target. Tonight, you are not sleeping in your apartment, Vesperi commanded, the tone utterly final. You are sleeping at the palazzo. Michelle's mind raced. The palazzo, his fortress, the safest place on earth, but also the ultimate prison. And her laptop, her true mission, it was in her apartment, exposed. I cannot, Mr. Vesperi. My personal files, my research notes. He cut her off, his eyes burning with an intense, possessive heat. Your personal life ended the moment you signed that charter. I am not asking, Michelle. I am protecting my queen, and the queen cannot leave the board. He pulled her up, a quick, firm movement that brought her body flush against his for a fleeting, intense second. He released her immediately, stepping back to maintain the non-sexual distance, but the contact was enough to remind her of the raw, uncontained power she was dealing with. He strode to the intercom. Get the car ready. We're going out. And call my personal armorer. Michelle will need a security detail. He looked back at her, his face a chilling mask of focus. I will not lose this game, Michelle. And I will not lose you. She stood there, watching him, a profound, terrifying revelation dawning in her mind. His protection was absolute, not because she was an asset, but because he was beginning to desire her, a desire as possessive and dangerous as his ambition. The hatred that fueled her mission was now fighting a losing battle against a sudden, profound realization. She was falling in love with the only man who had ever truly seen her. Foreshadowing. The move to the palazzo will force an intimate proximity that will either break Michelle's resolve or seal her fate with Vesperi. The Palazzo Vesperi was a fortress masquerading as a penthouse. Michelle's new quarters were not a small room, but a vast suite directly connected to Tom Vesperi's own, via an ornate, soundproofed private lounge. She was not a guest, she was a possession, kept under the ultimate level of security. The room smelled of clean Italian linen and the faint, persistent scent of sandalwood. Tom's territory, now hers. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the silent, indifferent city below. The view was breathtaking, but she felt the panic of a caged bird. Her hidden laptop, her years of data, her lifeline to the outside world, was 2 miles away, exposed and vulnerable. A discreet knock on the connecting door startled her. "Come in," she called out, her voice slightly strained. Tom Vesperi entered, no longer in his bespoke suit, but wearing a dark, heavy cashmere sweater and trousers, an image of comfortable, ruthless power. He held 2 snifters of deep amber liquid, though he knew she preferred water. "Drink this," he commanded, his voice low. "It will calm your nerves." The security breach was deep, Michelle. They knew where to look. "We are safe here, but vigilance is not a choice." He walked to her side, offering her the glass. She accepted it, the warmth of the crystal against her palm, the aroma of expensive brandy hitting her senses. "You should know," she stated, her voice regaining its cold precision, "that by bringing me here, you have exposed my personal research notes." "Which concern what, exactly?" Tom asked, his eyes sharp, assessing her for any sign of betrayal. "The weaknesses in the Falcone family structure." She lied smoothly, her hatred lending conviction to the falsehood. "I was planning my own exit strategy, should the Vesperi organization fall." He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. He believed her, her calculation of vengeance now perfectly aligned with his need for ruthlessness. "Admirable," he conceded, raising his own glass in a silent toast. "But unnecessary. The Vesperi structure does not fall. It consumes. Now tell me about the Falcone's real estate portfolio. They have a building in Tribeca that is a liability. Find the flaw." The conversation was once again purely professional, Yet the atmosphere was charged with the high-stakes drama of their shared peril. They stood close, looking out over the glittering cityscape, two architects of destruction united against a common enemy. The proximity was intoxicating. Michelle pointed to a specific residential high-rise. The funding for the Tribeca project was laundered through a shell in Panama, Mr. Vesperi. But the true weakness is not the financing. It is the ownership. The building is tied to a blind trust held by Falcone's youngest daughter. If that trust is exposed, the collateral damage is entirely personal. It would break him. Tom Vesperi slowly turned his head, his eyes burning with an intense, sudden heat. He didn't speak, but his gaze was a communication. You know the rules of this world better than I thought. You know how to strike where it hurts. He reached out, his hand moving to her hair, brushing a stray lock from her cheek. The gesture was tender, yet possessive, a terrifying blend of non-sexual intimacy and absolute ownership. You have a dark heart, Michelle Jones, he whispered, his voice dangerously low. A heart that seeks justice through destruction. I am fascinated by it. Michelle felt the raw, undeniable flush of heat rise in her chest. She hated the compliment, yet her pulse quickened. The attraction was no longer just the thrill of power. It was the magnetic pull between two people who fundamentally understood each other's hidden ruthlessness. He stepped back, breaking the proximity. Tonight, we rest. Tomorrow, we build the case against Falcone. Sleep well. He walked toward his private suite, his figure dissolving into the darkness of the lounge. Michelle couldn't sleep. The unfamiliar comfort of the bed, the knowledge of Tom Vesperi being a soundproofed door away. It was all too much. She moved to the window, watching a late-night freighter move slowly up the river. A few hours later, a muffled sound came from the private lounge. The dry sound of a low, frustrated curse, immediately followed by a sharp, resonant thud of a heavy book hitting a desk. Michelle instinctively went to the door. She pushed it open slowly, quietly, drawn by the sound of distress from the man who was never supposed to show weakness. Tom Vesperi was in the lounge, now bathed in the cold, soft light of the pre-dawn city. He was sitting at a glass-topped table, a chaotic mess of blueprints and architectural drawings spread out before him. His head was in his hands, his posture one of rare, complete exhaustion. "Tom?" she asked softly, using his first name instinctively. He snapped his head up, his eyes wide and surprised. The mask of the Don was gone, replaced by the look of a man struggling with an immense hidden burden. "I apologize," he said, his voice husky. "I should have been quieter." Michelle walked into the room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. She looked at the drawings. They were not for a building, but for a massive, complex underground cistern, a water system. "What is this?" she asked. "A secret," he replied, his eyes regaining their intensity, warning her away. "A liability. A weakness I inherited." Michelle looked closer. She saw the structural fault, the point where the cistern intersected a main subterranean utility line. A flaw that, if exploited, could flood the entire area, including the foundations of the Vesperi Global building. "It is a ticking bomb," she whispered, her analytical mind immediately grasping the danger. "Precisely." Tom sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "The weakness in the Vesperi Foundation. The one thing I cannot fix without exposing our true depth to the world." He stood, walking toward the window, his back to her. He was showing her a vulnerability no one else had ever seen. The gesture was a test of trust, a dangerous, intimate gift. Michelle, for the first time, saw the true weight of his power, the responsibility, the solitude. She walked to him, a sudden, spontaneous act of unbidden emotional comfort. She placed her hand on his forearm. The cashmere was soft, but the muscle beneath was hard, taut with tension. The contact was a profound, simple act of human connection, not attraction. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said, her voice low. Tom Vesperi turned slowly, his eyes dark with a mixture of surprise and a sudden, fierce gratitude. The moment hung suspended, charged with a powerful, non-sexual emotional chemistry. He was the Don, the ruthless killer. But she saw the man beneath, the one wrestling with his inheritance. He moved his hand, his fingers slowly wrapping around hers, not to pull her closer, but to hold the connection, the brief, necessary moment of shared burden. His hand was large, warm, solid. "I hate this world," he confessed, his voice almost cracking. "I hate the games, the blood, the constant scrutiny." "Then why do you stay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned down, not for a kiss, but to bring his lips close to her ear, close enough for the palate of his whiskey-scented breath to warm her skin. The proximity was overwhelming, an intimacy of shared secrets and vulnerability. "Because if I leave," he whispered, the sound a low, resonant rumble, "the jackals will tear down the structure, and everyone inside will pay the price. And now, that includes you." He pulled back, his eyes intense, searching hers. He released her hand, the sudden loss of the warmth of physical shock. He had offered his secret and accepted her comfort. The line between controller and companion was hopelessly blurred. Michelle walked back to her suite, the knowledge of his secret a new weight on her shoulders. Her hatred for the organization remained, but her hatred for the man who bore its immense burden was dissolving, replaced by a terrifying, reckless empathy. She was becoming his ally, and that was the true danger to her mission. Foreshadowing, Michelle now holds the ultimate secret of the Vesperi organization, a power that completely binds her fate to Tom's, regardless of her mission. The next week was a blur of high-stakes work and impossible proximity. Michelle and Tom Vesperi worked side by side in the private lounge, the room of shared secrets and hushed intensity. She analyzed the Falcone files, exposing their financial vulnerabilities with surgical precision, while Tom made calls and issued commands, a silent, powerful presence radiating commitment and focus. Michelle's hatred was slowly being eroded, replaced by a devastating admiration. She witnessed his intelligence, his precise ruthlessness, and the rare moments of exhausted vulnerability she had seen in the pre-dawn hours. She was falling for the monster she was meant to kill. One evening, as the city lights blurred into a backdrop of gold and sapphire, Michelle stood over the holographic display of the Falcone real estate grid. She found the fatal flaw. The Tribeca Trust was linked to a private, non-profit foundation, a detail that provided a legitimate cover, but exposed the personal tax liabilities of Falcone's daughter. "Here," Michelle stated, her finger tracing the weak point on the display. "If you hit the foundation's tax status, the entire trust is invalidated. It exposes the daughter. It is a clean, personal destruction." Tom Vesperi leaned over her shoulder to examine the data. The move brought his body dangerously close, the warmth of his chest a steady, powerful pressure against her back. The closeness was no longer forced. It was a silent, comfortable extension of their working intimacy. She felt the subtle texture of the cashmere of his sweater against her silk blouse, the scent of his clean, musky skin intoxicatingly close. "Brilliant," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble near her ear. The heat of his breath sent a shiver that was both pleasure and terror down her spine. "A clean, personal destruction. The way I like it." He didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he rested his hands on the console, boxing her in, the proximity a silent, overwhelming declaration of their bond. "You have given me the win, Michelle," he whispered, the intimacy of the moment suffocating. "How will you pay for it?" Michelle turned her head slightly, her gaze locking onto his. They were mere inches apart, caught in the electrifying space between control and surrender. "I pay for it in loyalty, Mr. Vesperi," she replied, her voice husky. "Loyalty is a word," he countered, his eyes dark, intense. "I prefer the physical commitment." He moved his hands from the console, slowly resting them on her shoulders. The touch was firm, possessive, a silent command for her to stop retreating. He was testing the boundaries she had so carefully maintained. A sudden, sharp crash of glass, and the loud, violent sound of an alarm ripped through the tense silence of the penthouse. The lights in the room flickered, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the frantic red flash of the security system. "Stay down!" Tom's voice barked, instantly switching from lover to commander. He shoved Michelle hard, using his body to shield hers, sending them both tumbling to the floor. The force of the impact was jarring, the hard marble cold against her shoulder. Tom Vesperi was instantly on top of her, his body a heavy, solid weight of protection, crushing her into the floor. The non-sexual proximity was now absolute, an act of pure, primal protection. Michelle felt the hard, unyielding muscle of his thigh against hers, the frantic, deep thump of his heart against her ear, and the raw, desperate smell of his adrenaline flooding her senses. "They're in the perimeter," Tom hissed, his voice tight with controlled fury. Michelle was pinned beneath him, unable to move. She felt a terror she hadn't anticipated, a fear not for her own life, but a sudden, devastating fear for his. The hatred for the organization evaporated, replaced by the terrifying, consuming need for his survival. "I cannot lose him. Not now. Not before the mission. Not before—" She reached up, her hands instinctively clutching the soft cashmere of his sweater, holding on to him, securing him in the chaos. The texture of the fabric was rough against her desperate fingers. "The escape route," she gasped, her breath ragged. "Compromised," he replied, his voice a low growl. They knew the layout. The sound of heavy, running footsteps echoed down the hall outside the lounge. The tension was immense, stretching the moment to its breaking point. Tom Vesperi moved his head, his face inches from hers. His eyes, in the flashing red light, were burning with a fierce, possessive intensity. "If we get out of this, Michelle," he whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, "you will no longer speak of a debt of loyalty. It will be a debt of life." He pulled a small, sleek black pistol from his waistband. His grip on the weapon was professional and steady. He then reached down, his fingers finding the sharp angle of her chin, forcing her gaze to meet his. The pressure was firm, a silent command for her to stay alert. He moved his body slightly, shifting his weight just enough to create an inch of distance between them, but he didn't move away. He remained her shield. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound. I will draw them in." He kissed her then. Not the subtle, calculated brush of lips from the first time, but a hard, demanding kiss of desperation and absolute claim. It was a kiss born of terror and the white-hot relief of their shared survival, a raw, pure expression of the uncontainable chemistry they had created. The taste was of whiskey and adrenaline, a mixture of danger and forbidden desire. Michelle responded instantly, fiercely, her hands pulling the cashmere of his sweater tight, refusing to let him go. The kiss was a brief, violent storm, a desperate exchange of breath and life in the face of imminent death. He pulled back, his eyes dark, breathing hard, his lips swollen with the force of the exchange. He didn't speak. He simply stood up in one fluid, silent motion, leaving her suddenly cold and alone on the floor. He moved toward the door, pistol raised, his body already a coiled spring of readiness. "If I don't return," he commanded, his voice sharp and final. "You know the flaw in the cistern plans. Hit the main utility line. Flood the floor. Drown the problem." And then he was gone, disappearing into the dark hallway, leaving Michelle with the paralyzing terror of the running footsteps and the lingering raw taste of his desperation on her lips. She lay there, tears of frustration and fear tracing hot paths down her cheeks. Her mission, her hatred, her vengeance. It all felt irrelevant now. The only thing that mattered was the sudden, devastating knowledge that she loved the monster, and he was walking toward the sound of gunfire, leaving her with the command to destroy his own fortress. Foreshadowing. The kiss and the command to destroy the fortress confirm Michelle's new role. Not just the analyst, but the only person Tom trusts with the ultimate self-destruct mechanism. The silence returned not as an absence of sound, but as a suffocating, heavy presence. It was the silence of the aftermath, worse than the violence itself. Michelle remained on the cold marble floor, her body trembling, listening to the muffled sounds of struggle from the distant wing of the penthouse, followed by the definitive dry snap of silenced gunfire. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind was a chaotic tangle of tactical analysis and raw emotional devastation. The taste of Tom Vesperi's kiss, urgent, desperate, an act of claiming ownership in the face of death, still burned on her lips. Her hatred, once an impenetrable fortress, had been breached and flooded by a sudden, terrifying rush of love and fear. "Drown the problem," his voice echoed in her mind. The command, the ultimate act of trust, was a paralyzing burden. She could end it all now. The Vesperi Empire, the attackers, and her own agonizing dilemma. But that would mean losing the man whose heart she had just heard hammering against her ear. After what felt like an eternity, the low, powerful rumble of the security door to the private lounge hissed open. Tom Vesperi stepped back into the room. He was immaculate, a testament to his lethal efficiency. His cashmere sweater was torn slightly at the shoulder, and a thin, slow trail of blood, dark and viscous, was seeping from his forearm, quickly absorbed by the expensive fabric. But his eyes, though heavy with adrenaline and fatigue, were clear and focused. He looked at her, still huddled on the floor, and a faint flicker of tenderness, a rare vulnerability, crossed his features before the Don's mask snapped back into place. He walked to her slowly, deliberately, his movements stiff with controlled exhaustion. He extended a hand, not a command, but a simple offer of aid. "It is over, Michelle," he stated, his voice low and steady. "Security is restored. They failed." Michelle took his hand. His skin was warm and rough, but the grip was a lifeline, strong and certain. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed slightly on the unfamiliar stilettos. The moment she was vertical, he immediately released her, creating a safe, professional distance, though the memory of his weight on her body lingered like a brand. "Your orders?" she asked, her voice raspy, clinging to the familiar structure of business. Tom walked to the bar, pouring himself a measure of dark brandy. He offered her the snifter, and this time she took it, needing the burn of the alcohol to steady her nerves. The aroma of complex spice and ancient oak filled her nostrils. "The orders remain the same," he replied, turning to face her, his gaze intense. "The Falcone family is responsible. You will prepare the final analysis for the destruction of their foundation. Tomorrow. Now, you will sit down and assess the damage." He wasn't talking about the penthouse. He was talking about them. Michelle sat on the sofa, the fine leather cold beneath her. She looked at the small bleeding wound on his forearm. "Your arm. That requires attention." Tom Vesperi walked to her and sat beside her, maintaining the respectful distance required by the return to business, but close enough for her to feel the residual heat radiating from his body. "It is superficial," he dismissed. "A scratch. But the damage to our structure is not. They were looking for the documentation on the cistern, the secret you and I share." He reached out, his hand gently grasping her chin, forcing her head to turn towards him. His thumb stroked the spot on her lower lip, where his mouth had violently claimed hers only moments before. The touch was soft, possessive, a silent acknowledgement of the raw intimacy they had just shared. "The debt is paid, Michelle," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers, creating that intense, silent communication only they possessed. "You now owe me nothing. Yet you stayed. You didn't run. You didn't give the command to flood the floor." "The risk was too high," she lied, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The real reason was sitting right in front of her. "The risk," he countered, his voice a low, insistent rumble, "was exactly the point. You chose me over the structure. You chose life over logic." He leaned in, his face close enough for his breath to warm her cheek. "I will not speak of the kiss. It was an act of a dying man. But know this. From this moment on, you are not just my analyst. You are my anchor, the woman who saved my fortress and my life." He released her chin, letting the unspoken weight of his words settle between them. The bond was forged, not in love songs, but in the white-hot crucible of near death and shared secrets. The emotional chemistry was no longer subtext, it was the text. Michelle felt the tears well up again, but this time they were not of fear, but of profound dilemma. Her vengeance against the Falcones was now a direct act of devotion to Tom. She would be using her mission to solidify her position as the woman who saved the Don. The Falcone analysis will be complete by morning, she said, her voice strained, returning to the only safe ground they had left. I know it will, Vesperi replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Because I know you, Michelle. Better than you know yourself. He stood up and walked toward the door to his suite. As he reached the threshold, he stopped and looked back. Have your driver collect some things from your apartment tomorrow, he commanded. We will have to formalize your residency here. You are not safe anywhere else. My laptop, Michelle interjected quickly. My personal files are crucial for the Falcone analysis. They must come here. This was the final gambit. She had to bring her primary weapon, her proof, her mission log, the core of her hatred, into his fortress. Tom Vesperi paused. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. A long, intense pause that was a deliberate, dramatic beat, perfect for the neural narration. Send a 4-man security team, he finally conceded, his voice heavy with the realization of the risk. They are to bring only the laptop. I will personally review its contents when it arrives. Everything you touch, Michelle, must now pass through my hands. He closed the door behind him with a soft, decisive click. Michelle sat alone in the silence, the snifter of brandy cold in her hand. She had won the ultimate prize. Her weapon was coming into the fortress. But the price was total transparency. The man who loved her would soon hold the exact proof of her 10-year plan for his destruction. The new mission was not to kill him, but to survive his truth. Foreshadowing. The laptop is the ultimate double-edged sword, the culmination of her vengeance and the proof of her betrayal. The climax is imminent. The air in the private lounge was cold, clinical. The morning sun, usually a source of golden light, seemed only to illuminate the sterile, polished surfaces. Michelle sat opposite Tom Vesperi, the large black laptop resting on the table between them. A silent, loaded gun. The security detail had retrieved it an hour ago. Tom hadn't spoken since it arrived. He had simply placed it there, a final, unsaid challenge. Michelle felt the pervasive, low-level hum of fear in the room, a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The Falcone analysis is complete, Michelle stated, her voice unnaturally even, clinging to the professional facade. I have the final figures for the Foundation audit, ready for your review. Tom Vesperi ignored her, his slate eyes fixed on the laptop. He reached out and slowly opened the lid. The machine sprang to life, displaying a login screen. The password, Michelle, he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, a cold, empty drone that was more terrifying than rage. Michelle hesitated. This was the point of no return. Her 10 years of planning, her revenge, her hatred. It all came down to this single, devastating word. She had to choose between their life together and her mission. She chose the truth. The password, she whispered, her eyes meeting his, is vengeance. Tom Vesperi typed the word. The screen flashed, and a single, meticulously organized folder opened. Falcone dossier. Final phase. He opened the folder, his fingers moving with agonizing slowness. Inside, the documents were not just about the Falcone financial structure. They were the full, annotated history of the Moretti family's demise, Michelle's family, at the hands of the Falcone organization, detailing the losses, the forced bankruptcy, and the single definitive transaction that Vesperi's former capo had facilitated, a transfer that began her descent. Tom Vesperi read. He did not blink. He did not move. He simply allowed his eyes to devour the truth, the detailed, chronological evidence of the betrayal that had driven the woman sitting opposite him. Michelle watched him, forcing herself to be still. She saw the minute, almost imperceptible tightening of the muscles around his jaw, the only outward sign of the turmoil beneath. I hate you, but I love you. Do you understand? Her heart pleaded silently. After a long, agonizing minute, Tom Vespery slowly leaned back in his chair. He closed the laptop lid with a soft click that sounded like a final gunshot. Vengeance, he repeated, the word a low, resonant accusation. 10 years. You infiltrated, you seduced, you waited for the keys to the castle, and you chose to use the final weapon, your truth, to dismantle me, not them. I chose to give you the weapon against Falcone, Michelle corrected, her voice trembling but holding firm. I gave you my best work, my core hatred, to protect the structure that saved your life. I hate what you represent, but I do not hate you. Tom Vespery stood up, his movement radiating absolute, contained power. He walked to the window, staring out at the cityscape, his back to her. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet, the silence of betrayal and profound realization. You forced me to unmask you, he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. You forced me to make you visible. You forced me to protect you with my own body, to give you my secrets. You forced a debt of life, all of it, a calculation for this moment. I never calculated the kiss, Michelle whispered, the admission tearing from her, raw and real. I never calculated the fear of losing you. He turned back to her, his eyes cold, lethal. That is a lie, Michelle. You calculated the risk of the truth. You calculated the risk of the love. And you chose to let me discover it, knowing my pride would forbid me from killing the woman who saved me. He walked toward her, stopping directly over her, his shadow enveloping her. The proximity was overwhelming, not a threat of violence, but a threat of emotional finality. I trusted you with the cistern, Michelle. I trusted you with my life, he murmured, his voice laced with an agonizing, possessive hurt. He reached out and gently touched the crimson silk of her dress. You are the color of fire. And I was burned. Michelle stood up, facing him, matching his intensity. She reached up and cupped his face, a repeat of his own intimate gesture from Chapter 5. But this time, it was an act of surrender. Her thumb gently wiped a smudge of dust from his temple. The plan is over, Tom, she said, her voice filled with desperate, fragile love. The vengeance is dead. All that is left is the truth. I am here. Everything I touch is now yours. I broke my own fortress for you. She leaned in, her eyes locked on his, and kissed him. A long, soft, profound kiss of total surrender. It was a kiss that communicated the entire 10-year journey. The hatred, the fear, the chemistry, and the final, devastating, unwanted love. The lingering taste of his skin and the rich brandy was the flavor of her new, dangerous fate. He pulled back, his eyes dark with conflict. He looked at her, truly seeing the woman who hated his world but loved him. The woman who had given him the ultimate power, the knowledge of her secret. Tom Vespery reached down, picked up the laptop, and with one swift, smooth movement, he opened the window and threw the computer out. The sound of the glass smashing dozens of stories below was the final definitive sound of the end of her mission. The vengeance is not dead, Vespery stated, his voice dangerously low. It is simply redeemed. We will finish the Falcones, but we will do it together. And your past remains your secret. If anyone ever asks, your loyalty was only ever to me. He took her face in his hands again, his gaze fierce and absolute. You broke my heart, Michelle. Now you will rebuild my empire, and your debt is not paid in loyalty, but in forever. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers again. The game is over, he whispered. The war has begun. Welcome home.
Said your hands were stained with power. Said loving you was a mistake that only ends in fire. You walked in like you owned the night. Every room went silent, cold eyes, a dangerous calm, a king who never asks, only decides. I should've